welcome back. Richard Ransom, Otis Sanford here. We're talking about the the race for district attorney for Shelby County as we lead up to the general election. But the primary going on right now, early voting has already started. The actual primary day is in early May, May 3rd. And we're talking to all three Democrats who want to unseat Amy Wyrick for that race. We just talked to Linda Harris in the first segment, so let's bring in candidate number 2 now, Steve Mulroy, a U of M law professor who also wants to unseat Amy Wyrick here. But before we get to that, I got to let you address something that Linda Harris said about you in the previous segment. Steve, she says that even though your record to civil rights is unquestioned, that she doesn't think you have enough experience in the criminal justice realm like she does as a former cop and lawyer in the criminal justice system, and she's worked for many, many years to qualify you for that job.
Well, Richard, I'm being criticized, so I must be the front runner. I was a former federal prosecutor as well as a civil rights lawyer for the U.S. Department of Justice. And then I have taught an entire generation of criminal lawyers, both prosecutors and defense lawyers, for the last 22 years at the University of Memphis Law School, where I've both taught and published in the area. And every one of those years, Richard, I have litigated criminal cases, criminal defense cases, cutting edge cases, which created precedent at both the trial and appellate level in both state and federal court. And I've been doing that for the last 22 years. So I don't really think there's any question that I have the requisite experience. And in fact, I have balanced experience because unlike the other candidates, I've done both prosecution and defense. I have been both a federal prosecutor and a federal civil rights lawyer. So I think I have the kind of experience that's needed, and it's a broad experience.
Steve, you have raised a lot of issues in this campaign critical of Amy Wyrick. One of them in particular is that what you say is a lack of diversity in her office. Now, Amy Wyrick responded to that by saying it's kind of ironic that a white male running against 3 female candidates is going to bring up the issue of diversity. And I might add that a frequent guest on this show, Ken Whalum, who says nice things about you, has also said publicly that if you care so much about diversity, you would step aside and let 2 African-American women become the Democratic nominee for this job. How do you respond to all of that, especially what Amy Wyrick said?
Well, I think what Amy Wyrick says doesn't really make a lot of sense. Does that mean that, only white males can't be concerned about diversity? What I was primarily concerned about was racial diversity, which is really terrible in that office. As you know, Otis, 90% of the attorneys in that office are white. In this county, that's just unacceptable. Even if you throw in support staff, only 30%. Or maybe 31%, using her numbers, are persons of color, and that's unacceptable. And as to what Reverend Whalum says, look, the people who have endorsed me and asked me to run in this race, County Mayor Lee Harris, State Senator Ramesh Akbari, Councilwoman Patrice Robinson, County Commissioners Van Turner, Mikkel Lowry, Reginald Milton, and on, have all said that I need to run because I am the person that can beat Amy Wyrick in the general election. I'm the only candidate in this race that has ever run for office before, has held elected office, has name recognition, and I have a long kind of progressive track record that'll help me make sure that people know what I'm going to do once I get into office, and the county government experience that nobody else in this race has to actually implement the kind of reforms that we've been talking about. So you go ahead and ask the people that I just named whether I think I need to step aside or whether they think that I'm the best candidate to be the Democratic nominee.
One argument I hear, Steve, is that Amy Wyrick is going to be a tough one to beat because in this community that is so fed up with crime, there's a lot more people who are fed up and really like her tough stance, and some would argue heavy-handedness, including African Americans, than are concerned about her heavy-handed approach to prosecuting cases. How do you plan to unseat her if that's the case?
Yeah. Richard, let's take a look at the Memphis and Shelby Crime Commission's own data. that showed that violent crime had been going down in the 3 years before Amy Wyrick took over in 2011 and has been going up steadily every year, almost every year, ever since, to the point where we're not only #1 in the state for violent crime, we're #1 in the country for violent crime per capita. Clearly, what Amy Wyrick has been doing has not been working, and we need a different approach. She has not been keeping us safe, and I think that the people who are concerned about violent crime, as everybody ought to be because it's out of control in Memphis and Shelby County, are not going to say that 8 more years of the failed policies of the last 11 are what we need.
Well, also, Steve, there's been a lot of talk in this campaign about juvenile crime. You have been critical of Amy Wyrick for, as the other Democratic candidates have, for putting too many juveniles through the adult courts, or just charging them and putting them in detention needlessly. What would you do differently to handle juvenile crime in the city and county that Amy Wyrick is not doing?
Well, for one thing, I would treat kids as kids. Juvenile defendants in juvenile court need to be kept in juvenile court as much as possible, where there's a broader array of rehabilitative services. We don't need to be transferring them over to adult court, where they end up in adult prison, which is essentially crime college, where they're taught to be career criminals without rehabilitative services, and where the statistics show they're at greater risk for sexual assault, suicide, and they're more likely to become repeat offenders when they come out afterwards. So not only is our policy under Wyrick deeply inhumane, it's actually counterproductive. It's not keeping us safe. What I would do instead is, rather than having a system in which Shelby County alone does more transfers of juvenile defendants to adult court than all other counties combined, 95% of them being African American, I wouldn't do that. I would create a strong presumption of keeping juvenile defendants in juvenile court. Adult transfer would have to be personally approved by the DA or somebody in top management, and the strong presumption would be to keep them in juvenile court and treat kids as kids.
Steve, naturally, the dialogue seems to focus on Democrats being soft on crime as far as Republicans are concerned. And some local Republicans I've talked to say they can't wait to paint you in that same light if you do end up getting the nomination for the DA's office. How do you plan to counteract that? Because I think that no matter how people feel about criminal justice reform, they want to feel like the DA is not going to be squeamish when it comes to prosecuting criminals who need it.
Richard, I used to put people away when I was in the federal prosecutor's office. I've got no problem doing that. I've made clear from the very first day of my campaign that we absolutely need to be tough on violent crime. But we've kept our eye away from the ball. We need to refocus on violent crime and not waste time with the petty prosecutions like that of Pam Moses that you've been seeing from the Wyrick administration. And we need to be fair at the same time. Tough on violent crime, but smart and compassionate on youth, on people who haven't even been convicted of a crime, like who are bail reform and things of that nature.
Okay, I got to end it there, Steve. I'm sorry. We'll make sure every candidate gets a fair shot here, but we really appreciate your time today, and we wish you good luck in the rest of the campaign.
Well, thank you both very much. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. We'll be back with Janika White, our final candidate, right after.